Hey Ottawa, this is Annalie Rice. I'm a realtor here in Ottawa, Ontario, and this video is going to be different than my other ones. Normally I bring the weekly stats of what's going on in the Ottawa real estate market, but today's video is a bit of a special one, and it's all about stats, because I bet some people wonder why the numbers that are in the news versus the numbers that they see on different realtors' websites or Instagrams or whatever differ. And it's really confusing to a lot of people what's actually going on in the real estate market. And so I'm going to try and go through things and explain what it is that's different between different stats and what you're actually seeing when you compare them. Okay, so the monthly stats, most real estate realtors and real estate brokerages release monthly stats. They usually come in some way or fashion from the Ottawa Real Estate Board, that's OREB, and sometimes people include the CREA, which is the Canadian Real Estate Association stats. Some stats are averages. There's you might hear of an HPI, but what do these different stats actually represent and how do they differ? So let's go through that. Okay, so first off, we're going to talk about monthly sales volume, which means how many homes sold in a given period. And it really depends on who's talking. So first off, most people might just see, every month, a few days, about a week after the end of the month, there'll be a bunch of news articles talking about how the market changed. And so this example was the early March CTV News article in Ottawa, talking about Ottawa home sales and prices in February were up year over year. So that was just the headline. And then they get into sharing some of the numbers. And so where do they get those numbers? Okay, so first off, the Ottawa Real Estate Board, that's OREB, every month they release a news release of the details and the stats from the board. And you can actually find that on their website and read the full report. But the news networks will have just basically the highlights and make a big headline out of it to either make people excited or scared about the real estate market. So in this month's update, that's for the February stats, it said that there were 886 units that sold. And then the second part of it, if you scroll down through there, you end up getting to some information on the number of listings, sales activity, months of inventory, but then also prices. That's the different bullet points there, and they talk about the different prices. We'll get into the prices a little bit later in this presentation, but first off, we'll just talk about the sales volume. So that news release is actually pulled from a report that the Canadian Real Estate Association creates for the Ottawa Real Estate Board, and there's a link to it from the OREB news release page, and it's in 18-page document. And you can get into a little bit more detail. It starts off with the news release page, and then it gets into more details on charts and stuff like that, which I'll share a bunch of it later in this presentation. But then the source document from that is actually a 2,800-page report that gets created by the Canadian Real Estate Association. I'm not sure if that's available publicly, but most of the data is available on the CREA website if you really want to get into it. So some people, the news releases will have the data from the Ottawa Real Estate Board, but what do you see on most realtors or brokerages, Instagram or websites or Facebook? So I've just pulled 4 different samples from different real estate brokerages or agents around the city. And all of these 4, although there are obviously different ones that are released by different people, most of them are still pulling this data. And you'll see the circles there circling 1,008 homes sold. So it also has prices and stuff, so we'll look at those later. But 1,008 versus the other one, the board said 886. Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference there. And I'm going to confuse it a bit more just to talk about what I release. So every week I give stats, and then at the end of the month I compile the whole monthly stats And this is the chart from my last update for February. And you can see there that I actually had 755 sales in February of 2024. So clearly we have some discrepancies, and I'm going to explain why. So here's just a little snapshot of where the different numbers were. I did have to extrapolate a little bit of the numbers from the different sources, but my stats, I had 330 detached, 178 towns, 230 condos for a total of the 775. The Royal LePage stats, and then many of the other brokerages, they all are using what used to be the released board stats, and they just lump in all freehold, so 763 freehold, and then 245 condo for a total of 1,008 for February. And then we have the CREA and the new board stats, which had, and maybe these categories shouldn't be exactly that, but the 453 was single family, and I'll get into this a little bit more. They had townhomes of 288 and 140 being apartments only for a total of 886. So if a person was to look at a news article and then look at their local realtor or their a different release by a local realtor, you can be very confused as to what is actually going on. So why are there differences? So we got 775 or 886 or 1,008. And the reasons are, first off, it could be the area of coverage, and I'll show you what each of those are. It can be a little bit more minor is the board the property is listed on. So there's different real estate boards. And then also the numbers and how they're breaking down into different property types and how they're being reported. So the first off, let's start with the biggest one there. So we had 1,008 sales were reported by many of the realtors, and this is the old real estate board stats. And so if you look at the map there, this is just sort of a screenshot of all the properties sold through the Ottawa Real Estate Board, the MLS system, and regardless of the location of the property. So you'll see that there's some that are almost down by Kingston. There's like Alexandria, Eastern Ontario. You've got north of Pembroke and Petawawa. These are all properties that were listed by Ottawa Real Estate Board members, regardless of where the property was listed. And so their data that's why there's a bigger number, because it's a bigger geographical area. The next smallest, or the next largest number, was the Ottawa Real Estate Board and CREA stats. And that one is a slightly smaller area. So it's similar in that it was all the properties sold through the Ottawa Real Estate Board members through the MLS system, but it's the City of Ottawa boundaries as well as a bunch of the rural towns. So the City of Ottawa, what they do is they take the whole geographical area. In fact, it's across the province, and they have different district codes for all the different neighborhoods and areas of the city. And then each of the little towns has their own little code. And then the rural areas around those little villages and towns will have different codes. So in this case, I reached out to CREA to find out what the codes are and why the numbers are different, because I was really confused. And if I'm confused, I'm sure that the average person is beyond confused. But what they do is the numbers, I looked into all the different numbers that they're using, and it's the City of Ottawa boundaries plus all of the villages, like the more populated areas. So you've got like Russell, Embrun, Winchester, Chesterville, Rockland, Carleton Place, Almont, and Kempville. Those are kind of the main ones. And then a few of the rural areas, but most of the rural areas between all of these little villages are not included. And then the final one, these are my stats. And I created these stats, and I've been reporting them for over about 2 years now, on a weekly basis, and then monthly updates. And because I was really tired of having stats from like all across Eastern Ontario and basically everywhere being lumped into it. And so I started to report just the City of Ottawa boundaries. So this is the 775 sales that were reported in my monthly stats, and they're all in the City of Ottawa boundaries only. But the one difference here, and it's not a huge difference for the most part, is that I included properties that were listed by realtors from the Ottawa, Cornwall, Renfrew, or Rideau boards, because our matrix, which is our search platform and the one that records all the sales, is actually a shared system for all 4 of these boards. And I don't think it matters if the person's from Cornwall and they list it here. If they list it on the Cornwall board and it shows up here, it should be counted in the sale of an Ottawa property if it's selling in the city of Ottawa. So those numbers do skew it slightly. So just to give you people a bit of a knowledge of it, if you're not aware, the city of Ottawa boundaries is actually quite large. It does include a lot of rural areas. So that's the boundaries in the red there is of the city of Ottawa. And then if you watch my weekly updates, I actually give data for a lot of smaller areas within the city of Ottawa. So I split out Orleans, the central urban region, Barrhaven and Riverside South, and Kanata-Stittsville. And I understand this, I'm clearly not giving the data for all little places. I do exclude like Blackburn Hamlet and Bell's Corners and Finley Creek Leitrim, which is a growing area, and I might start including it in the future. But for now, it's really just the large suburbs and then the central urban area. But those are the areas that I report every week. And when you look at it superimposed on the city of Ottawa, so I include the full city data, and then I get into those different regions of the city just to give a little bit more of a zoomed in information of what the sales are and what the prices are in those areas. Okay, so that was the number of sales, and you can see that, you know, it really has to do a lot to do with geography, but and then a little bit lesser scale of who's reporting it, and how the numbers skew is a little bit to do with what's being reported in each one. The sale prices, that's the second part. Okay, so how do those differ? So this is the chart that I include, or table that I include every month after the monthly stats are in. I separate out detached, semi-detached, the freehold townhome, condo townhome rows, and condo apartments. And then so I give like the average prices for those different properties, and then I compare it to the month before. What you get from most of the realtors or the brokerages, or what was the board stats previously, they lump in together residential. So you see the $705,000 price point there. So residential, in that case, that would include all of the detached homes, semi-detached homes, and the freehold townhomes, all lumped into one price. And then the condo is lumped in both the row and the condo prices. So most, it's just residential versus condo, and that's what you get that way. But then there's the difference. Then you've got, this is back to the Ottawa Real Estate Board news releases, and you can see that the prices are different still. You've got single family homes with an average price of benchmark price, and this is going to become a little bit more important. Benchmark price of $708, the townhouse row unit of $495, and then the benchmark apartment price down at $417. So here I put them all into one table. So my stats, so for single family, my stats are 862, but you'll notice the little D there is detached. So I separate the detached homes there. So the average detached home being 862,000. The old board stats, or what you see from a lot of the realtors, is also, most of the realtors include just the all freehold, so all residential. But if you delve into the actual board stats, you can look at those and separate out the single family detached there, and that their average was 796. And so that discrepancy is based on that whole geographic area. So 862 is just inside the city of Ottawa boundaries. 796 includes all those rural areas, you know, it could be Petawawa, it could be Cornwall. 796, it kind of gets watered down. And then you've got the CREA Ottawa Real Estate Board thing, and their definition of single family, I'll get onto that in the next slide or two, says 709. So that stat is what's put into the news releases, and it says, the average single family home is 709, and that's because of it being a benchmark price, and I'll explain that. So then the other category is townhome. So again, my stats are freehold townhome, so that's the F. And my average price for February was 603. Again, if I pull the board stats, not what other realtors share, but the board stats, the average was 539, and that would again be brought down because you've got townhomes in like Limoges or Embrun or Cornwall or wherever, where the prices are lower. So that's pulling down that average. And then the CREA and Ottawa Real Estate Board stats have it at 495. And again, I'll show that. But that's basically because the benchmark price for townhome, the definition of townhome, is anything that's attached. So that includes the attached row home that is a freehold and the attached row home that is a condo. And for me, condos are condos, and freehold is freehold. So I don't, in my full table, I separate them, but my townhome stats is a freehold townhome. So condos, my stats are all condos, and that's 431. The board is at 430, and that again is all condos, so that's apartments or rows. But then again, their geographic area could include condos that are outside the city. The reason the difference isn't very much there is because there aren't that many condos that are outside the city. There's not a lot of condos in the rural towns at this point. And then the CREA Real Estate Board benchmark for it is not a condo, it's an apartment. So it's only looking at the apartment style condos, but again, in the broader area. And so that would include the condos, apartment condos out in a small town if they had them, but it's only the apartments, and it tends to be the row ones that are a little bit more expensive potentially. Okay, so why the discrepancies? Well, I just explained it while I was looking at the last chart, but the area of coverage is going to have some discrepancy. So the board stats or the different realtors that share that are going to have that wider area, all of Eastern Ontario, basically. The type of home in the category definitely has to play a part if you're defining apartment as only condo apartments, or if you're including townhomes. And in fact, one thing that I didn't mention on the last one is that the CREA stats for townhome actually include the stacked townhomes as well. So that's the style of home where you've got, it's like a 4-story where one unit is on the bottom 2 levels and the upper level is another unit. So those are stacked townhomes. So those are included in the townhome definition for the CREA Real Estate Board stats, which is definitely probably the biggest thing that's pulling that average down. And then, so that's the price definition. So then there's the difference of average prices versus the HPI benchmark, which I kind of mentioned, and we'll get into that. Okay, so what is the MLS Home Price Index or benchmark price? Okay, so the benchmark home is, and I should have an equal sign there, is the typical home on a typical property in a typical neighborhood, okay, versus an average price, which is susceptible to the swings with the changes in the market and the mix of some homes sold. So I'll get into a little bit of that, and first off, it'd be probably interesting to see how those prices can be different. So here we've got 3 charts. This is the definitions of single family. So again, single family benchmark and average price, single family for townhome benchmark and average price, and then the single family for apartments and average price. So you can see in general, the HPI price the benchmark price is lower than the average price. It's sort of like a following stat, like it catches up over time. But then this is the apartment one that's zoomed in. So this is one of the things is when I'm doing my weekly stats or monthly stats, I do always and often point out, especially with condos and then often the semi-detached market, is that there's a lot of volatility, and that's based on which mix of properties are being sold. So in the case of a semi-detached, you could have like a 1960s semi-detached in, Alta Vista or Center Point, and that might sell at 550,000. And then, just not too far away, you've got the whole Westboro $1.4 million semi-detached luxury homes. So depending on which mix of semi-detached homes sell in any given week or month, you can really skew the average sale price. So the benchmark, the same thing happens with apartments. So you can have luxury condos and you can have really, older condos. And it really depends on what is selling, how new the units are, how big they are, how small they are. It really can differ. So here, if you look at this chart here, it shows the apartment benchmark price and the average price. And you can see that the benchmark one is much more smoothed out and muted. And so it doesn't spike up and down the same. It does move in the same direction overall as those averages do, but it is a lot more smoothed out. So for the citywide, so when I mentioned that they had that 18-page document, and then you could open it up to a 2,800-page document. This is the citywide benchmark prices for different property types. So although they do separate it out into like single family being, detached semis, detached and semis, and then townhomes and apartments. They do separate them out when you get into the more detailed stuff. They do separate it out into 1-story and 2-story for the single family. So if you can see here, they've got started with the composite, which is the black one, and that's all properties. Like if you said, the price of all properties in Ottawa, that would be the price, the average price of home selling in Ottawa is whatever. But it's always going to be their benchmark, and they're saying what's the average typical home on a typical lot in a typical neighborhood. And so this is for all of Ottawa, but you can see sort of the townhomes versus apartments versus single family homes as a whole, and then 1-story and 2-story make up that single family together. So what does a benchmark home look like? So these are just 2 examples, and I know they're really small, but this is for the city of Ottawa as a whole. So they have the townhome and the single family. And so it's interesting to see when you get into the different areas how these can really differ. And I'll show you that on the next slide. But city of Ottawa, single family, they're talking about like, a 3-bedroom above ground, totally finished basement, masonry siding, 2-bath. Typical home would have a single detached garage, the living area above ground, but just a little bit shy of 1,500 square feet. 2.5 baths, forced air, natural gas, lot size of 4,379 square feet. Has a basement, it's detached, and then the average, the typical home would be built in 1998. So they're taking all the homes in the whole city, the detached and semis, and they're saying like, the typical home in Ottawa is this. And then they do the same thing for a townhome. How many bedrooms, how many baths, square footage is a bit smaller there. And then the year built was 1984. So obviously that's not representative of a lot of the homes in Ottawa. So that's how they get into more details. And so this is a snapshot of the single family from 2 different neighborhoods in Orleans. So I purposely chose 2 totally separate neighborhoods, but they're not that far physically apart. So first off, you've got Bilberry Creek and Queenwood's Heights, which is, central but older neighborhood in Orleans. And then you've got Avalon West, which is much, much newer area that's still being built in, and that's sort of a new neighborhood. So if you look at the single family, so this is detached or semis, and they have the same thing, like, so 3 bedrooms. In fact, in the MLS for single family, they actually include that a lot of them could be row homes, finished basements, and the average age for Avalon West would be 2017, while if you look over at Bilberry Creek, the average age of the home there would be 1981. So these benchmark descriptions and the benchmark definitions of what it is and what's the average or what's the benchmark is going to change over time. So and this is way beyond me, I'd have to talk to somebody at CREA for this, but basically they take the long-term averages and they look at the new homes that are being built and how many homes are selling, and they basically update these over time, over the years. The benchmark will change, and that's sort of why, because they have to take longer term averages, that's why the prices take a lot longer to update. So over time, the prices will catch up. It's a lot more muted. It's a lot more less peaks and valleys because they're looking at longer term averages. But over time, it gives you a more precise, I guess, idea of how things are changing. So I'm hoping that I have cleared up some of the questions and get rid of the questions, and hopefully have a little bit more knowledge on why the stats and such could be very different. I think my takeaway comments for this are that if you're looking at just the news headlines, it doesn't apply directly to your house or what you're looking to buy. And if you're even just looking at what your local realtor in your neighborhood posts online, it doesn't apply exactly. Those averages might be for the whole of Eastern Ontario. It's not very accurate. So that's why I do the weekly stats, to try and give a little bit more clarity that's a little bit more specific to certain areas. If somebody wants to know how many detached homes in Orleans sold, but there are still the limitations of me using average prices. But I like to point out the reasons why, if the average is all of a sudden 100,000 higher, why is that? Certain houses, a number of houses sold that were higher up, or, certain house that took forever to sell, things like that sort of play into why the averages are higher or lower each month or each week for that matter. But I think the takeaway on this is that no matter which stats you're using or seeing, say if you just have your local realtor that is sending you stats every month, and you see that, as long as whoever that is using the same stats month over month, and they're able to give you a little bit of the context as to what it means and what does it mean for you, it's good. But in all these cases, it really is just the start of a conversation. And if you ever need more details on what your situation is, your house, what your house is worth, and how it compares to other homes, that's what all the realtors are there for, and they're ready to give you that information and help you make the best decision for your situation. So I hope that this has been helpful and informative, and if you do have any questions, then I've got my information is there, and you're welcome to reach out or leave a comment on this video and let me know what you thought of it. I hope that you have a great day and a great week, and again, if you do have any questions, please reach out.